Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage.
On the evening of the 2nd of June 2026, Riot police clashed with hundreds of demonstrators in Southampton. Bricks, stones, glass bottles, flares and wheelie bins were hurled at officers. Police vehicles were attacked. 2 people were arrested for assaulting emergency workers and possession of an offensive weapon. That morning, Nigel Farage had issued what he called an emergency address to the nation. Those 2 facts are connected. This video asks how connected, what the law says about it, what is being done, and what it tells us about where this country is heading. So first I'm going to look at what Nigel Farage actually said. Let us be precise about what Farage said, not a summary, not a paraphrase, his words. Quote, "The rights and privileges of white people matter less than those of ethnic minorities." And that's Nigel Farage in his emergency address to the nation on the 2nd of June 2026. And quote, "Think of this. The biggest fear a police officer now has is the fear of being reported for having acted in ways that was racially biased. That fear now greater than dealing with a dying man lying on the ground. I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage." Again, that's Nigel Farage, emergency address to the nation on the 2nd of June 2026. And quote, "Britain's historic way of life is being thrown away." Again, Nigel Farage, emergency address to the nation, 2nd of June 2026. He also invoked the murder of George Floyd, specifically comparing Henry Nowak's words, quote, "I cannot breathe," to Floyd's final words, while criticising politicians and media for what he called silence in 2026 compared to the response to Floyd's death in 2020. He called this case, quotes, "the most shocking footage of discrimination you will ever see." 3 things need to be said about those words. First, the claim that police fear of racism accusations caused Henry Nowak's death is not supported by the evidence. As established in my recent Henry Nowak video and the judge's own sentencing remarks, the officers were deceived by a fabricated 999 call. They made a catastrophic error of judgment in seconds on false information. The evidence does not support the ideological bias narrative. And second, Henry Nowak's own family explicitly asked that his death not be used to create division, hatred or tension. Farage ignored that. He published his address on the same day Henry's father, Mark Nowak, made that request.
We want to use Henry's heartbreaking story to make change for the better. We do not want his death to be used to create further division, hatred or tension. We want his story to make our streets safer for everyone. That is why we are calling on the government to treat knife crime as the national emergency that it is. We need real solutions. We need investment in prevention. We need stronger action on the sale, the ownership and carrying of all knives. And as this case so painfully demonstrates, we need common sense applied to our laws. This doesn't mean knee-jerk reactions. This doesn't mean going to extremes. It just means a common sense approach to law and order. As the KC for the prosecution summed up in court, this is not a case about Sikhism, this is not a case about racism, this is a case about murder.
And third, the words, quotes, "pure, cold rage" were published at approximately 8 a.m. The riots began at approximately 6 p.m. There were 10 hours between the call and the disorder. So next I'm going to look at, did his words cause the riots? The honest answer to whether Farage's words caused the riots is, it probably contributed, but cannot be proven as the sole cause. Causation in public order is never a single line. The body cam footage itself caused outrage across the political spectrum. Tommy Robinson and Lovin Fox also travelled to Southampton to address the crowds. Social media amplification was happening independently of Farage's broadcast. The people who threw the bricks at police make their own choices. But the question is not whether Farage threw a brick. The question is whether a prominent elected politician with a national platform and 1.4 million Twitter followers was calling for, quotes, "pure, cold rage" in racially charged terms hours before a riot contributed to the conditions that produced that riot. This is not the first time this question has been asked of Farage. In August 2024, after the Southport stabbings, Farage posted a video questioning whether, quotes, "the truth is being withheld" after 3 children were murdered. False rumours spread online that the killer was a Muslim and an asylum seeker. Riots followed across England. Hotels burned, mosques were attacked, 741 people arrested, 302 charged. A former counter-terrorism police chief publicly accused Farage of helping to incite that violence. No charges were brought. He's doing it again. The pattern is documented. So in terms of incidents, the Southport stabbings in August 2024, Farage's role, he posted a video questioning whether truth was being withheld, fueled misinformation about the killer's identity, and what followed? 741 arrests, 302 charged, hotels burnt, mosques were attacked. The charges against Farage? Nothing. The incident, Henry Nowak riots in June 2026. Farage's role called for, quotes, pure cold rage, framed the case in explicit racial terms, published an emergency address on the day of the riots. And what followed? Riot police deployed in Southampton, bricks, bottles, flares at police, 2 arrested. And the charges against Farage? None, as of the 3rd of June 2026. So next we're going to look at, should Farage face criminal liability? The relevant law is the Public Order Act 1986, Section 18. The offence is using threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour with intent to stir up racial hatred, or where racial hatred is likely to be stirred up. Section 18 carries a maximum sentence of 7 years imprisonment. The case for the prosecution, Farage made explicit racial claims, quotes, the rights and privileges of white people matter less than those of ethnic minorities. He framed a murder case in racial hierarchy terms. He called for rage in that context. He has a national platform and knew his word would reach millions. Racial hatred in the form of attacks on the Sikh community that the judge himself said was being put at risk. This was a foreseeable consequence. Riots followed hours later in the same city. And the case against the prosecution, the quotes, pure cold rage is not, quotes, go and riot. So Farage can argue that he was calling for political anger, not physical violence. Political speech is strongly protected under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. To prosecute, the Crown Prosecution Service needs a realistic prospect of conviction. That means proving intent or likelihood of racial hatred beyond a reasonable doubt. The courts have historically set that bar high for political speech. And Farage is a sitting MP, which does not give immunity, but does make the political cost of prosecution significant. So the honest assessment is this: the case is borderline. It is not obviously prosecutable, but it is not obviously not prosecutable either. What the law requires is an investigation. What the police have announced is a review of anti-racism guidance. Those are not the same thing. The question is not whether Farage will be convicted. The question is whether what he said warranted investigation by the police and referral to the CPS. On the available evidence, it did. That investigation has not been announced. A man threw a milkshake at Nigel Farage in 2019 and was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay damages. But Farage called for pure cold rage on a racially charged case, and riots followed hours later. The milkshake thrower faced criminal charges within weeks. Farage has faced no investigation at all. There is one more comparison that cannot be ignored. Lucy Connolly is a former childminder from Northampton. On the 29th of July 2024, the day of the Southport murders, she posted a message on X calling for mass deportation and urging followers to set fire to hotels housing asylum seekers. The post was viewed 310,000 times before she deleted it. She pleaded guilty to stirring up racial hatred under Section 19 of the Public Order Act 1986, the same act that applies to Farage's broadcast. She received a 31-month sentence. Her appeal was refused. Farage responded by embracing her as a martyr. At a Reform UK conference, she was introduced as Britain's favourite political prisoner. Farage hugged her on stage. Reform UK floated a so-called Lucy Law to prevent future prosecutions for online hate speech. He then made his own broadcast calling for pure cold rage in racially framed terms, hours before the Southampton riots. Connolly was a private citizen who posted in anger and pleaded guilty. She was prosecuted under the Public Order Act. Farage is an elected MP who made a calculated broadcast that trended nationally and faced no investigation. If he believes her prosecution was unjust because her words were protected political speech, he should welcome the same standard applied to himself. He has not called for that. So next they're going to talk about why nothing is being done. There are several reasons why no action has been taken, and they need to be separated. The first is legal. The CPS applies a two-stage test. Is there sufficient evidence, and is the prosecution in the public interest? Given the high threshold for Section 18 prosecutions of political speech, the CPS may have concluded that the evidence is not sufficient. That is a legitimate legal test. It does not mean the words were acceptable. The second is political. Reform UK is polling in first place nationally. 27% in the latest YouGov and Ipsos polls, ahead of both Labour and the Conservatives. Farage holds a parliamentary seat. Prosecuting the leader of the opposition in waiting for a speech, however inflammatory, would be presented by Reform and its supporters as exactly the two-tier justice they claim to be fighting. The government is acutely aware of this. Acting against Farage politically would hand him the martyrdom he has been building towards for 30 years. The third is the precedent. After Southport in 2024, the same question was raised about the same man. No charges were brought then. Bringing them now on a case with a higher threshold would require explaining why the threshold was crossed here but not there. The CPS does not want to be in that position. The result is a system that is structurally unable to hold this person accountable, not because the law does not exist, but because the political cost of using it is calculated to be higher than the political cost of not using it. That calculation may be wrong, and it is certainly worth challenging. Next, we're going to talk about Starmer. Where is the leadership? Keir Starmer did respond. Let's be fair about that. Quotes, I think Nigel Farage's reaction is the wrong reaction. He would be wrong in any circumstances. But when Henry's family are saying, please don't do that, it is our son, then really, politicians as human beings should start where they start. Nigel Farage is completely wrong to use this to try and create division. That's Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, on the 2nd of June 2026. That is a correct statement. It is not a leadership statement. Let's compare it to Starmer's response to the Southport riots in August 2024. He stood at the Downing Street podium on the 4th of August and said, quotes, I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we have seen this weekend. Be in no doubt, those who participated in this violence will face the full force of the law. The following day, after convening an emergency Cobra meeting, he promised an army of specialist police officers and vowed swift criminal sanctions. In 2026, after riots in Southampton triggered by a broadcast by the same political figure who contributed to the 2024 disorder, Starmer told broadcasters that Farage was, quotes, wrong. The discrepancy is not trivial. In 2024, the riots were larger and more sustained. That partially explains the difference in response. But the question of why a Prime Minister who is a former Director of Public Prosecutions has not called publicly for police to examine Farage's broadcast under the Public Order Act is a reasonable one to put. Starmer knows the law better than almost anyone in public life. He led the CPS for 5 years. He knows what Section 18 says. He knows what the threshold is. He knows whether the broadcast warranted investigation. His silence on that specific question is a political choice. It may be the right political choice, but it should be acknowledged as a choice. Next, we're going to look at, is the UK heading towards the French pattern? The French comparison is being made. Is it fair? France has recurring serious civil disorder. In 2023, after the police shooting of Nahel Merzouk in Nanterre, riots spread across the country for 10 days. 3,354 arrests. Hundreds of buildings, vehicles and municipal infrastructure were burnt. But the decision that the UK population has to make going forwards is whether we want riots to become our norm and whether we are satisfied as a community with riots as a social outlet. Next, I'm going to look at the pattern for the viewer to judge. I'm not going to tell you what any of this means. I'm going to lay out a pattern and I'm going to ask you to look at it and decide for yourself. So first, the factual basis. Southport 2024, Farage posted a video questioning whether the truth was being withheld. His video fed directly into false social media rumours that the killer was a Muslim asylum seeker. The killer was born in Cardiff to Rwandan parents. He was known to police and MI5 before the attack. Henry Nowak 2026. Farage stated that the police prioritised Digwa's complaint over Henry's life because of race. The judge's own sentencing remarks said the officers were deceived by a fabricated 999 call. Next, the racial framing. For Southport 2024, Farage employed a cover to protect a Muslim perpetrator at the expense of white British victims. And regarding Henry Nowak in 2026, Farage stated explicitly, quotes, the rights and privileges of white people matter far less than those of ethnic minorities. Next, the concept of generalising the individual toward universal. For Southport 2024, Farage said, one stabbing in Southport became evidence of systemic concealment about Muslim criminality across British institutions. And regarding Henry Nowak in 2026, Farage said, "One murder in Southampton became evidence of systemic anti-white bias across all British policing." And next, the instruction. For Southport 2024, Farage implied, "The public is being lied to. Act on that." And for Henry Nowak 2026, Farage said, quotes, "I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure cold rage." What followed? For Southport 2024, 741 arrests, hotels attacked, mosques targeted. A former counter-terrorism chief said Farage helped incite the disorder. And for Henry Nowak in 2026, Riot police in Southampton, bricks, bottles and flares thrown at officers, Tommy Robinson and Lawrence Fox at the scene. Now let's look at the internal pattern. Reform UK candidates have been exposed repeatedly for posts calling for migrants to be shot in the English Channel, describing Islam as a cancer, using racial slurs about the then Prime Minister, praising Enoch Power as, quotes, unfulfilled, and suggesting Parliament would be, quotes, filled with Muslim MPs by 2035. In September 2024, Farage promised rigorous vetting. In July 2025, Reform loosened its vetting requirements. A Reform candidate who posted racially offensive content in 2013 was defended by the party on the grounds that his views had, quotes, matured. He continued campaigning. The candidate for mayor of Hampshire who told David Lammy to, quotes, go home to the Caribbean, Lammy was born and raised in London, but the mayoral candidate of Hampshire was defended by Farage. The candidate stayed on the list. And then there is Lucy Connolly, a private citizen, no platform, posted in anger, deleted it, pleaded guilty, convicted under the Public Order Act, embraced by Farage as Britain's favourite political prisoner, introduced to cheers at his party conference, held up as evidence of two-tier justice, the same two-tier justice he invokes every time one of his own candidates is exposed. Here is what I am going to say. I'm not going to characterise Nigel Farage. I'm not going to apply a label. I'm going to describe what I've observed, a consistent pattern across multiple incidents in which factually contested or false premise are used to advance an explicit claim that the white majority is being structurally disadvantaged by British institutions in favour of ethnic minorities, followed by an emotional instruction to an audience of millions, followed by disorder, followed by rehabilitation and celebration of those within his orbit who crossed the line he did not cross, while facing no legal consequences himself. That pattern is documented. Every element of it is sourced. You have been watching it with me for the last 20 minutes. You can see what it is. So in conclusion, Henry Nowak was murdered. Vikram Digwa is in prison for life. Justice was served. What happened next? The body cam release, the outrage, the emergency address, the riots, the silence had nothing to do with justice for Henry. His family said so. The judge said so. Nigel Farage used the name of an 18-year-old murder victim to call for racial rage on the day his father asked for peace. Riots followed. He has faced no investigation. The Prime Minister called him wrong and moved on. The milkshake thrower was prosecuted, but the man who called for pure cold rage was not. I'm not arguing those things are equivalent. I'm asking for you to sit with that disproportion and decide what you think it tells you. If you think the question of whether Farage's comments warrant investigation should be raised with your elected representative, write to your MP. Ask them specifically whether they have called for or would support a police referral to the CPS of the broadcast made on the 2nd of June 2026. Make them answer that question. This is Tech Heroes. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.